Who's heard of Spring Framework before? Just curious. Okay, most of the job. Oh, wow. Okay, cool. All right. So hi, I'm the Spring Central Twitter handle. I basically I'm the main product manager for Spring at Pivotal. I joined VMware in 2012. My name's Pieter Humphrey. Joined Pivotal and VMware at 2012 from BEA Oracle kind of background. So I've done developer tools, Java Enterprise for a good 15, 17 years kind of thing. So that's just a teeny little bit about me and who I am. I work at Pivotal. They're the stewards of the, hey, how's it going? Of the Spring Framework. We employ the majority of the committers. We have a lot of community people involved, but you know, the lion's share, the people. Is there internet in here? Is there wireless here? Okay. I'm not sure I'm going to need it, but do you know what it is? It PayPal guest? Conference? Cool. Anyone know what the password is by any chance? One more time? Hiring? Okay. Okay. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so anyway, so you know something about Spring Framework. That's great, because that'll help a lot. I mean, Java Application Development Framework, right? I mean, this is what you're... Yeah, totally, good call. Oh, all uppercase, haha, thank you. So they really mean that they're hiring now. Okay, I get it. Cool, you're about to witness my Google Chrome tabs, which is a scary place to be. So I apologize in advance. Cool, so let's get started. Who develops REST web services in whatever language they're doing? Okay, great, so most of you. All right, so hopefully this will speak to you. Like I said, the Spring team, we're all over the place. We're located all over the world. I'm just some of the local chapter here in the United States, but they're an amazing bunch of people. I think Spring Boot is really the most interesting thing I've seen to come along to Java development in the past 10 or 15 years that I've been working there, which is a lot of why I joined the Spring team, because they're just doing some really kick-butt work. So let's get to it. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that the Spring Conference is right here in Moscone Center in San Francisco, December 4th through 7th. Discounted tickets expire in a week or less. We're going to have 2,000 people this year. It's going to be crazy. A lot of DevOps, CI/CD, cloud platform, in addition to Spring, data, all kinds of great stuff. So join us. Yeah. So anyway, what's it like not building a Spring Boot application in Java? Let me just get started, because we've only got 45 minutes, and I think I can really deeply serve you in terms of your knowledge of Spring Boot if I can just plow through it. And then if you want to have questions, ask me at the end. I'll totally hang out for a few minutes. So what's hard about not building Boot application is often you get in class path hell. There's a jar missing, there's one too many, they have a class path collision, something's not visible. We've all seen this movie, right? Resolving it is kind of a pain in the ass, right? It's okay, you have to read stuff. Wait, hold on, is the symbol resolved? No, oh, okay. No class step, we've all done this. It's a business Spring Boot can get you out of, basically. The version compatibility matrix of well, I'd like to use Spring Security, but I don't know if Spring Framework 5.8.7.4.28.5 works with 2.1.8.5. It's just get out of that business. You're fine, you're done. If you want to, set up a WebLogic server or a web server, to deploy your code to, you have to do all this stuff. You have to set up things, you have to install them, you have to configure them, you have to pick ports. It's a lot of work. I live this life. I've done it many, many, many times. They have tools that make it easier, but Boot makes it real easy, stupid easy. Just, yeah, I'll get into that in a few minutes. It also really helps prevent environment drift. So by taking a web server like Jetty, Tomcat, Undertow, a Java web server, this is the servlet engine, Node.js or Ruby, I forget what the web server is, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. Some sort of servlet engine, by embedding it into an executable jar file and not having it be something you deploy to and have to kind of match up with. It's just auto-configured by boot and shoved into the jar file, and then when you want to run it, you just type Java minus jar and jar file name, and you have a listening process on port 8080, right? And it carries along all of its application dependencies, because it's not like a JEE server or a servlet engine model where you have this long-running Java process that you're deploying an app to, and it has to fit in a socket for it to freaking work, right? It's nope. Like it's all the dependencies for that make that app work are packaged in that jar file. So it's very CI/CD-able, right? It's very friendly. It's just a single little thing. It's very easy to kind of have Jenkins deal with it and script around it. You know, move it from place to place, make it do the things it needs to do, right? And that keeps it from drifting when you move from environment to environment. When you're working on your local desktop, to when you're working on a cloud or when you're working on a bare metal server or whatever, you don't have to worry so much about, there's one less container that you need to worry about, like, oh shit, did I forget to do the timeout, the same setting on both sides, like all that kind of stuff. It gets rid of a lot of boilerplate code. It's also a programming model, right? So it's almost as concise as something like Groovy or Kotlin. Is that familiar to anyone in this room? Groovy, Kotlin, just curious. Okay, basically, best practices and boilerplate code that just is ceremonial it's more about manipulating the framework than it is about your business logic, right? So, hey, you need to talk to a database like everybody else. Okay, well, you know, you need to configure this JDB in Java. You need to configure this thing called the JDBC template, at least in Spring. Or there's something analogous to it in almost every language. In Ruby, it's like the active record. You know, in JavaScript, I have no idea what their data access libraries are, but it's data access, right? So same thing here. Okay, you got to write this code. You got to give it. You got to tell it to snore. Like this is just stuff you hopefully don't want to deal with, right? Yeah. Have some intelligent configurations set up for you by default, like Ruby does, or like some of these other dynamic languages do, where unlike the sort of typical and long-standing Spring style or Java EE style of doing things, where you configure stuff up front and then you code, it's the other way around. It's like you just kind of start coding, you realize that it has certain assumptions and certain things run on certain ports. There's certain conventions in place, you learn what those are, and you just start coding. When you want to override that behavior or turn it off or customize it, Spring Boot kind of backs off. It's like as soon as you leave the desktop, right? And you get into like merging your code with integration tests or with, you know, maybe you moved into staging or production or something like that, you're gonna probably end up overriding the defaults. But the idea is get it working on my local desktop without a lot of friction. Like don't make me configure a lot of stuff up front. So that's some of the challenges historically in Java at least, maybe somewhat in other languages. I don't know, JavaScript is pretty like ready to go. I mean, you have to have your NPM set up and a bunch of other stuff, but whatever. So like I said, it's an opinionated framework for Spring. It makes it just more convention by configuration kind of style, amongst other things. So like I said, it's a programming model. You know, Maven downloads are kind of a crappy way of gauging the health of the community, but I mean, if you just look at the trend line, it's pretty obvious what's happening in terms of the pickup of it in the industry. In, you know, 22 million Maven downloads a month as of like August. I mean, we estimate about 50% of the install base, Spring install base, which is significant, is already using it. So a lot of enterprise Java is kind of like heading in this direction, at least by the numbers. You know, especially if you look around in other primary research that you've seen out in the industry, listen to analysts or whatever, they all kind of tell you the same thing. So what else can it do? It can basically get you started quickly, right? I've mentioned that. It handles all the Maven dependencies for you automatically. So like I said, it gets you out of that version control you know, business. Prevents the configuration drift by that war packaging, by the jar packaging and packaging all the dependencies that you need to run your app, including the web server, like in this one little file, right? That way, when you go from environment to environment, you don't worry about configuration drift and it blowing up and not deploying because, oops, you know, the settings aren't the same. And then a whole bunch of things. I'll get into conditional configuration in a minute, but there's some dev tools that it ships with, like every, you know, kind of server/programming model that you work with. There's some cool dev tools. Bunch of auto configurations, like I said, sensible defaults. You know, it'll create a database for you if it finds HSQL on your class path, and you haven't set up a database, it'll just set one up for you, stuff like that. And then it's just kind of friendly towards the nature of boot makes it very sort of easy for doing these small, discrete daemon-type services. And I'll talk more about that later. So let me kind of examine each one of these points in turn. The initializer is just quick start project generation. So that's like getting your initial IDE code set up. It's a service that you can actually fork and customize for your own company, or you can just use it as a web service. You can curl it even and have it spit back a project at you that you can suck into your IDE and use. Get coding. So yeah, it's a website. So why don't I just show it to you, right? Why have it be an abstract concept? So here's Initializer. It's just start.spring.io. And you just say, hey, I want a Maven or a Gradle project. I want to use Java, Kotlin, or Groovy. If you don't know what Kotlin or Groovy are, there are other JVM languages that are more dynamic. Kotlin's a little more functional. And then you pick your version of boot. And then you say, what's my artifacts? And then you tell it what dependencies you want. You can kind of auto-type your way, auto-complete your way through it. But I mean, this is just a taste. Web frameworks, SQL, UI templating engines if you're into server-side generated HTML, if you're not using like Angular in the front end or something. All kinds of data access, NoSQL data access, all this infrastructure for doing microservice development, working on containerized cloud type of applications, whole bunch of that. I mean, that actually goes on for several pages. A bunch of integration stuff. I mean, so you get the picture. This is basically everything in modern Java today. A lot of people trust this as their radar, frankly. Start.spring.io, trust that as their radar for kind of like what's cracking and what's proven in Java open source. Returning to that for a moment now that you saw the initializer. And like I said, when you click generate, it just spits out a zip file. You unzip it, right-click on POM XML if you're a Maven user, and just sucks it right into IntelliJ or Eclipse or NetBeans or whatever. Any questions so far? I'm kind of machine gunning people. A bunch of people came in after I got started, so that's unfortunate. But yeah, you can customize the initializer too. We have a Kroger Groceries is doing this. They're like they forked the repo and they have it generating sort of Kroger-specific setups, default projects. Maybe there's frameworks they like to use, in-house frameworks they like to use, that kind of stuff. So that's Initializer. It has 3 interfaces. You can use an IDE. You can, like Eclipse or IntelliJ. You can use the web-based interface that I just showed you, or you can use a CLI even by typing curl, which is kind of cool. So it has a REST API, effectively. So I guess you could drive it via an API if you wanted to for some reason. The other interesting thing, this is kind of how it's doing some of what it's doing in terms of dependency management. It's creating groups of automating the dependency management and getting you out of the version control business, the version control matrix business. There are all these virtual packages that we have deployed to Maven Central. So they just kind of instruct Maven what other dependencies to pull in. It's just creating a set or a grouping. Like it doesn't actually have any dependencies of its own inside of it. It's just like it's just a grouping, basically. So we say that the web starter, okay, well, what's that? It's like, hey, I need Jackson data binding. I want Spring MVC because I'm making a REST service, right? Want some validation. I want the Tomcat web server and like the Spring web library. Okay, so then you don't have to kind of figure that out and figure out which version is compatible with which version. So it makes it a lot easier, right? You know that what we ship you works, right? And in Java, when you're assembling lots of things from all over the world, right? Java is famous for having tons and tons of awesome third-party libraries out there. When you're assembling things and stitching them together, it makes it quite a bit easier. Yeah, so you can inherit all these sort of preset version numbers, which makes it really nice. The current practice is a little bit different. It's like, well, the starter versions are sort of guaranteed. They're determined by what version of Spring Boot you're using. So if you're using Spring Boot 2, Milestone 4, you know that this particular grouping is guaranteed to be compatible, right? So the starter web, the H2 database, and the data JPA starter, if you're doing some relational database access from Java, for example. But in the old world, are these compatible with each other? I don't know. That's up to you to figure out, right? You have to go look up that documentation up. I talked about the packaging, I think, a little bit already. That it produces this uber jar, fat jar, not only your application code, but whatever other libraries you decided to bundle with it. Let's say you were using a graphing library or whatever. Like, it would all be in there, including the Spring stuff and the web server, right? So that kind of makes it nice. You can choose between Tomcat, Jetty, or Undertow. Do folks use Tomcat for the most part? Jetty? Undertow? Like, what the hell is he talking about? I've never heard of those servers before. Yeah, those are all Java-specific servers. Sorry, folks that are not Java. But I think you all know what a web server is. So anyway, yeah. So that packaging is kind of nice. Like I said, it also makes it really CI/CD-able. But it means you're not fiddling with the app server configuration or calling, or worse, like having to open a ticket for ops to provision the right configuration for you. Yay, because that's awesome. You're not setting the class path unless you're adding your own dependencies, which in that case, just edit POM XML, have a nice day, right? And like I said, promotes consistency across the environments. Easy CI/CD with, and it also can be started as a Unix service really easily, like at init.d or systemd. I think it also supports running as a Windows service, I think. So for us, that basically kind of throws the traditional sort of large Java server in the trash. Like, it's a Spring builds all the capabilities that it's capable of on top of what? The servlet engine. That's it. Like, that's all we need. And now, by embedding the servlet engine into this jar file, you can run boot anywhere you have a JDK or a JRE. That's it. That's all you need, right? So it makes your flexibility in where you can deploy boot to, it's really nice. Anything that a JVM can run, which is pretty much everything, right? Profiles. I talked a little bit about getting, preventing configuration drift. When you graduate from off your desktop and you go into a CI pipeline, or you're promoting your code by some other method to an integrations testing area or a unit testing area or production perhaps. Spring has this nifty little profiles thing. You use an annotation and you can segregate parts of your app configuration into buckets and make those buckets and kind of correlate them with different buckets. Like, I want this to be my development settings. I want this to be my staging settings. I want this to be my production settings, right? You can check those into version control. Always a good idea, right? Whoops. Sorry, I guess I was leaning on the sideways button and not realizing it. Hang on. Sorry about that, folks. Yeah, so here's what it looks like. You're just using Java annotations in your code, like at profile, and you say development, and then you declare a class, and you have your configuration in it. Easy. When you deploy boot apps to Cloud Foundry, for example, it'll just automatically enable the cloud profile. So if it detects one, it'll just turn it on. Don't have to do a thing. In other words, you don't have to provide a Java command line argument when you're running, Java space, -d properties, like all that kind of stuff. Like, you don't need to pass Java exe a flag, like Cloud Foundry just turns it on. So nice way to kind of segregate your configuration. Then again, this executable jar, you can check it out from, you check out everything from source control. Maybe a typical CI pipeline, right? You check out code from source control, build this artifact, and then, like I said, the configuration gets, turned on depending on your active profile. That way, you don't actually have to change any code or recompile anything or redeploy anything, right? You just have the one artifact, and it works in any of those circumstances. No rerunning builds. So it just works. Also, when you externalize configuration, Java has a lot of flexibility. And what makes this is a long list of configuration precedents, but ignore all the specifics. I'm just trying to give you the sense that it's really flexible. And it'll take you all the way up to full sort of microservice style configuration where it's being hosted in a remote server that's doing version control for you, like a configuration server. A typical microservice pattern is that you keep your, or SOA pattern is that you keep your configuration as a network service. It's like a Git hosted network service. Rather than embedded inside the deployment artifact, because obviously if it changes, then you have to rebuild, right? So if you can change it at runtime, yay, that's nice. Dealer.com used to do this. Has anyone been to Dealer.com ever? It's like a car website, right? as you can imagine, models and cars change every 5 minutes, so they didn't want to bake like all the wizard configuration information into their deployable artifact. They hosted it as a Git hosted network service. So anyway, everywhere in between. So that's like one end of the spectrum is like network hosting it, and the other end of the spectrum is various styles of embedding it inside the deployable artifact, right? Whether it's an XML or maybe it's a Java configuration class or properties or yada yada yada. There's a lot of flexibility there, depending on how you like to work. Usually when people raise their hands and say that they've heard about the Spring framework, they usually think that it's from like 5 or 6 years ago and it's all sort of XML driven configuration. That's really like, that's just not, that went out along. It's still there, but we have evolved significantly since then. That was, oh yeah, almost a decade ago. So boot comes with some dev tools allowing you to kind of quickly restart your code. I won't bore you too much with the details there, but you just add it. If you want a whole bunch of these dev tools, you just add that Maven dependency in your POM file, and it turns on. It gives you a couple capabilities, things like, hey, if you change some files in the class path, then it'll just automatically restart the Tomcat for you, so that you're working with the most current version of the application. Just one less click, right? And then obviously you can exclude stuff like your static content, like static HTML, because it knows those probably those get reloaded dynamically by the web server. Any questions so far? I know I'm kind of going really quickly. Yeah, please.
So if I understood correctly with the conditional, production versus development, does
Yep.
that mean that the footprint of the artifact contains the union of production and development?
Correct. Which probably I can hear your next question coming, which is is it stored encrypted? Which is but yes, you're correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just text files. I mean, it's like properties files. Sometimes it's Java classes. It depends how you choose to do it. But unless the configuration is gigantic, like you're dealer.com and you're trying to encode a whole database of car models, year, manufacturer relationships, I mean, sure, maybe that could get a little large. But I mean, unless it was some sort of extreme case, it's usually nothing you need to worry about. Yeah. If you're on the lunatic fringe of that, then yeah, maybe it's worth maybe it's worth considering, but it shouldn't be a problem.
Well, you're saying that's mostly is choice between configuration.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really choice between the actual code.
Not following you. I'm sorry.
Well, to have like a Java class that you're using one class in development and another class.
Right.
That wouldn't happen. It's more related to configuration choices.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you could externalize it if you want. Put it in text files that you can bind to it at runtime. You don't need to embed it in the code if you don't want to. Absolutely. Yep. And a lot of different ways of doing that at that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just going to run an Eclipse demo. A what? Totally. Yeah. I have. Yep. I have a quick demo in the Spring Tool Suite set up already right here. So we'll go to that. I'll show you that in just a second. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll take you through it. It's very easy. Yeah. Don't worry. We'll start from scratch if that makes you feel better. Yeah. No worries. You can also do some things like remote debugging. I don't want to. Yeah. Maybe I should pause to show a demo so you see what it looks like. But just want to give you some of the sense for some of the possibilities, and then things like live reload. These all kind of decrease. These are all options that help you decrease the cycle time from I edited something to I see it on my web page. Right. There's just various flavors of that. The auto configuration is kind of where it kicks in where I'm talking about intelligent defaults. So do something quickly by default, make me work on my local desktop without me doing a lot of work to get it to happen. So this is kind of how that works. It says, hey, boot says, hey, I just detected that you had H2 in memory database in your class path. You added that jar to your Maven dependencies in your class path. But you didn't do anything after that. You didn't set up any database connection stuff. The driver URL or the what schema you're connecting to or any of that kind of stuff. So I'm going to configure a default one for you so that boot will not, you won't run into a Java exception on boot like so many app servers do, right? When the database isn't configured correctly. And they just cack, right? So no, I'm going to set up something smart. I'll set up something that will work. You can override it later, have fun, I just want to make sure I boot. That's kind of why we call it boot.
The creds are going to be transparently generated?
Totally, yeah. It's not like, absolute desktop settings not meant for production. Yep. I mean, you can override all that pretty quickly, of course, but yeah, definitely. The assumption is local, local host. Right, so a few other things. So hey, I'll auto-configure all the sort of Java-specific stuff that I need to make that work. And in your Spring application context, for those that are familiar with Spring, it'll just bind in a H2 data source JDBC template. JDBC template is a class that Spring provides that encapsulates a lot of like best practices in Java around connecting to a database. So how to clean up your connection properly, all that kind of stuff. Originally, Spring started as a bunch of consulting guys, and they created Spring Framework to sort of actualize a lot of their best practices that they learned over multiple gigs. So they didn't all just kind of keep making the same mistakes over and over again, like how to do a try-catch block properly when you're closing your JDBC connection and just stupid stuff like that, right? And then in aggregate, Spring became so many of those that it's become sort of a go-to for a lot of people. So anyway, so that application context, that's your dependency injection container, right? And it says, oh, okay, well, maybe you have timeleaf in your class path, which is a server-side UI templating Java library. I'll auto-configure this timeleaf-specific stuff so that timeleaf doesn't barf on boot. I think you're getting the picture here, right? So great, I'll bind in these sort of timeleaf-specific things into my Spring application context. And that way they're usable from your application and your beans. And then there's, of course, your app code, right? You can also explicitly exclude these auto configurations, and you can customize them to be specific to your project or the company you're working at, which is awesome. That part's really cool. Hey, you have a H2 or you have an Oracle database driver in your class path, right? Somebody probably works with Oracle in this room, right? Somebody probably has dealt with an Oracle database at some point in their career from Java or from whatever language. Hey, turn off the auto configuration. I want to provide my own. Thank you. Like, so it can and boot sort of like, oh, okay, I won't do anything. You can even get boot to sort of tell you, run a report afterwards if you're troubleshooting, these things don't work the way you expect them to, if you're sort of extending it, you can get boot to like generate a report for you that says what auto configurations did get applied and like in what order. So this can be pretty powerful when it comes to working, if you're optimizing for a project, a long-term project or something like that, this can be really helpful. Yeah, great. But at the same time, maybe you do want to keep the auto configuration on for another library. Whatever, that's all tunable. Okay. I mean, there's like 300 properties you can tune. I mean, so when I say it's tunable, I mean like it's capital T tunable. Like you can really go nuts with it if you want to. So that's pretty cool. And then the other thing that is inspired mostly by Drop Wizard, which is a Java library for that kind of inspired Spring Boot for doing REST services in Java. And one of the inspirations we got from them was this thing called Actuator. It's these built-in monitoring and management endpoints. So that just automatically get generated. You include this dependency in your Maven POM, and then you automatically get some management and metrics endpoints that are surfaced through HTTP, that are surfaced through a shell, actually a command line shell, if that's your jam, or JMX beans, which is in Java, that's the management API for JMX, Java Management, I forget, extensions, I think it means, right? But that's basically how that's a standardized part of Java for doing management control type backplane, metrics, auditing, server lifecycle, start-stop type stuff. And what are these things? So it's anything like you type in the URL for your Spring Boot app, whatever that is, /beans, you get a report of all the Spring Beans in the app. Maybe something more useful, you say, okay, well maybe you want it to shut down. Maybe you want to control its lifecycle. Or it gives you some arbitrary application info. You can find out what database migrations have been applied by Flyway or Liquibase. Here's where it gets really useful. You can have it spit out health metrics. Beyond just like I'm up or I'm down, you can have it spit out whatever you want. You can customize that all day long. And it just spits out JSON, right? It just spits out a REST response in JSON. Dump, You can get a heap dump, all kinds of stuff. What loggers, I'm using. Spring by default will log everything to standard out, as you would expect. But this is really handy because you don't have to code any of these, and you can just turn on the ones you need, basically, without any coding. People, I think this is one of the things that people love most about it. So I'll show you, let me just show you a quick demonstration. How much time do I have left? Oh, good, I got like 15 minutes left, so I can take some questions. All right, let me make this a little smaller, or attempt to make it a little smaller. Okay, so I have a really simple service here. Sorry, that one. Let me close a couple of these. These are from, I was at Java 1 early this week, so I still had some files open from running some demos for people for that. Sorry, let me just clean this up for a sec. There we go. Okay, so you can do this yourself. There's a whole ton of boot guides. If you just go to the Spring website and you go to guides right here at the top, there's a whole bunch of Spring Boot tutorials like, hey, how do I do messaging? How do I talk to databases? How do I upload a file? How do I make a REST service? So I'm just going to make a REST service real quick and show you how much code is involved and what's involved in doing it. I'm going to delete these two and start afresh so you see it's truly from the beginning. I do have an internet connection, right? Or else this won't work. Okay. Well, here it goes. Anyway, so yeah, any of those guides you can suck directly into the IDE. So every one of those guys on the website you can pull in. So I'll just say import Spring Getting Started content. And let's say REST service. And I want it to suck in both the initial and complete code set because it's a tutorial. It's trying to teach you how to do something. And I'm saying I want to use Maven. And then just click Finish. That'll create the projects in your IDE. In this case, I'm using Eclipse. Eclipse users? Okay, a couple. IntelliJ. Okay, a lot of the same people. NetBeans? I'm just curious. Gotcha. No, I'm kidding. So, all right. There we go. I think it's almost built. Bear with me for a second. Yeah, see, it even calls up the web page inside the embedded browser for you. It's kind of a nice little touch. So let's look at what's involved. I could do the tutorial from scratch. I'm just going to walk you through the classes because, gosh, they're really simple. So let's look at, this gets basically automatically generated, or not, excuse me, this is very simple to declare. This is just saying run as a Java main, right? Run as a Java application. In other words, at the command line. Okay. Any questions on that? Pretty straightforward, right? Okay. So this is just, this is just like one of the slight bit of ceremonial code that boot needs to do its magic, and that's it. Run as a Java app. Now, unless you wanted to package it as a WAR file and deploy it to something like a Tomcat, then you don't need this application class, and you would just never declare it. Okay, so then I have a very simple data structure. This has nothing to do with boot. This has nothing to do with anything except raw Java, just straight up plain old-fashioned Java, right? This is just a Java bean holding some data. Not terribly exciting. I mean, not a lot of code either. Greeting controller, here's where the magic happens. Okay, so I've got a couple import statements. Great. I type @REST controller, and it's going to give me basically all the sort of plumbing. This will say, okay, I know I need to speak HTTP at runtime, so I'm going to set up a Tomcat for this application, and I'm going to embed it in the application and make sure that it just, when you run it, it just starts up a process that's already listening on port 8080. All I'm doing is, here's my business logic, right? I'm just saying hello, name, hello world, right? This is where I'm telling it what URL to respond to. So I'm saying respond to /greeting. And then, yeah, a little bit of business logic here, just taking request parameters. So what does that actually look like? At runtime, it's not terribly exciting, but you'll notice that my Tomcat server here and my Cloud Foundry cloud I'm not connected to either of those. Okay, so I'm not deploying to local. I'm not deploying to Tomcat. So if I just right-click and say run as Spring Boot app, right, I was in the middle of saving that. Okay. Oh, Spring Boot started already. Yay, that was quick. What was it? 100 and something milliseconds. Yeah, or sorry, 1.13. Great, Tomcat's working. So I can just open that embedded browser and I can say local host 8080 greeting. And it'll spit back out JSON, and maybe I actually need to say HTTP because it's the lame Eclipse browser. Right, so hey, great, I get a hello world, or I get a hello Peter H, you know, so it's like it's taking a parameter and spitting it back at you. Nothing fancy whatsoever, but like there's a REST response, there's a REST API, like, you know, jump right in the greeting controller, and whoops, sorry, the greeting controller, here we go. You could just jump right in here and customize the behavior, and as soon as you hit file save, it would restart the web server for you automatically. So hopefully you're getting the picture at this point. I mean, that's, to create a REST service, what, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines of code. Not too bad, right? Not a lot of boilerplate, not a lot of like, I have to do a bunch of upfront configuration, which has been, and I'm harping on that. And if you're not in Java, you're like, God, he's like a broken record. Why does he keep saying that? In Java, you have to do a lot of this. So if you don't come from Java, you might not fully appreciate the sort of wincing pain that Java can be when you're trying to develop real applications. You know, something beyond hello world, something that's maybe just beyond a web app. Maybe something that does messaging, or maybe something that is, stream processing, or something more back-endy, right? Web apps, REST APIs are, again, fairly easy in Spring, but these days, at least in the Java world, most people, or I think in general, I think a lot of people are talking to JavaScript frontends in the browser, right? So whatever language you're doing, you're probably doing a REST service of some variety to implement your sort of back-end. But, you know, granted, not a lot of ceremonial stuff there. So that's pretty much all I had prepared, like out of the box. I'm about a couple minutes early. I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. And please, yeah, go for it. It's not very difficult. Here, I'll just kind of show you. Hold on. Oh, I'm sorry. Apologies. He asked, is it difficult to deploy it as a WAR file? If you do want to deploy to a Tomcat and not embed it, what does that look like? So there's a guide on that, actually, and it shows you what to do. Boot comes with 2 Maven and Gradle plugins, if you want to generate a WAR file, basically, you just reconfigure your project to produce a WAR file, and you just put a flag in your embedded container dependencies. Basically, wait, hold on. I think there was a example of it, but maybe not. Let's look at Maven because that's usually the most popular. So you just add the Maven plugin into your POM XML, and then looks like right. So your packaging is executable jar, and then here it is. Okay, hold on. Got it. Okay. Yeah. Looks like you're just declaring, making a slightly different declaration in your Spring Boot application, as opposed to having it be the main. You're putting this override in here, and then you're adding one little stanza for WAR packaging. That's about it. Yeah.
I have a question about scope.
Sure.
So when you make a modification to your app,
Mm-hmm.
you'll bring down the entire context and re-implement it without restarting context.
It just dumps the, it doesn't reboot all the system classes, it just reloads your app classes, depending on what mode you have it set in.
So if I were
It depends what mode you have it set in.
a second Spring Boot application,
Uh-huh.
does that run in the same Tomcat internally?
I mean, you could run multiple multiple WAR files on a Tomcat like you always have. Yeah, totally. If you have it set to run as embedded, then it'll be one jar file and one Tomcat server per boot app. Yeah, but you can, like I said, you can deploy multiple WAR files, multiple boot apps as WAR files to a single Tomcat if you like.
Is the reason for that so that you can then deploy it to multiple Amazon Web Services?
Sure, yeah, I mean, there's tons of reasons. It makes it easier to run against Jenkins if you're running CI/CD pipelines, because you just have this one artifact, and you know, like, all you have to do to maybe run a suite of integration tests is have freaking Java running. I mean, that's not, you know what I mean? So that's not a lot of work for you in terms of shell scripting or whatever to have Java running somewhere, and then boot just runs, and then you run your integration test suite, and you're done. Like, so, yeah. Yep, that's one big reason. Another reason, like you said, running on cloud environments, because you know a lot of ways that people are doing it is if let's say you have other dependencies besides a web server you want to include in your Spring Boot app. Let's say you need to talk to a database. That's usually not really a dependency. That's usually an external process. Sometimes it's a dependency if you're running like an embedded in-memory database or something. But anyway, those are weird development scenarios. That's where things like Docker containers or Linux containers make sense, right? Because then you have a packaging format that can drag the database along with it, and therefore it's sort of portable, more portable in these cloud environments where you're booting up Linux containers and virtual machines all the time, and things are like winking in and out of existence. So rapidly being able to set stuff up is important because you're doing a lot of it, and if it's easier to do than, you know, if you're using a platform like Cloud Foundry, it's all fully automated anyway, but if, let's say, you're using a container management system like Kubernetes where it's not really a platform and you have to do all the Ansible kind of Puppet Chef scripting yourself, you'll appreciate that it's just a jar file. Yeah, absolutely you will. Go ahead. You would typically put boot in a Docker image rather than like spit out. I mean, if you use Cloud Foundry, it'll containerize it for you, yeah. But I mean, don't do that reflexively. Like, do that for a reason. You know what I mean? But yeah. Sure. I mean, I forget the name of the Docker toolchain that you use to define what a Linux container is going to be. You would code up your thing in boot, run run it as a Spring Boot app, run whatever Maven build you need to, and have it spit out a jar file, an executable jar file. Take that and then stick it inside of a Docker image and either install boot as an init.d service in that Docker container, or like a, sorry, go ahead. Oh yeah, you're not pulling it from a repo. Yeah, you're not pulling it from a source repo. Why? Why would you? Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, it wouldn't make sense. Right. It's not that you just don't do it that way typically. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Like, I think he's kind of got the right of it, actually. You should listen to him. Sure. I mean, Cloud Foundry does that for you automatically. Like, I don't know. There's no reason really why we don't do it, but I mean, we just draw the line somewhere. Like, we have a commercial platform that we sell that is like a whole cloud platform. So Spring is meant to be kind of run anywhere. Like, Docker is somewhat universal, but not fully universal. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. So we leave that as an exercise to the developer. So you can do it. There's nothing preventing you from doing it, but we just don't have a tool that does it for you automatically. And it's not really, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of instances where you're not going to need Docker. Let's be honest. Like, sorry. I mean, it's just like the web server is the main thing that every app needs. Most apps need a database, granted, but sometimes REST services don't. You know what I mean? So if you don't need that, don't use Docker because you're putting a whole bunch of container overhead on something where you didn't need it. You know what I mean? Because you have all the dependencies you need. The whole point of Docker is to grab sections of the operating system and other external processes in terms of dependencies and package them conveniently. If you have all the dependencies you need, there's no reason for Docker. If you don't, great, Docker all day long. But like that's just where we drew the line in the tooling we support. Like I said, Cloud Foundry and stuff like that, totally automatic, right? But you know, we're not gonna. Yeah, I mean, we just don't do that. I don't know why. There's a good answer. It's just like we just drew the line somewhere. I mean, you're right. I guess it would be marginally more convenient, but
well,
yeah.
There's more decisions to make there too about which flavor of Docker container you're going to use, what kind of memory you're going to allocate to it. I don't know if they could come up with good defaults for every Linux environment.
Well, we have with Cloud. So thank you for mentioning that. We have with Cloud Foundry. There's a really interesting thing that we use called the Java build pack, which is basically Heroku's model. They actually use Heroku compatible build packs. You know, if you've ever read those D-Zone articles, and people banging their head against the wall in terms of Java memory management inside of Docker, like, there's nothing about Docker that makes memory management more difficult. Just Java memory management is a pain in the fucking ass. Like, it's not well documented. It's difficult. There's 6 memory regions. Who knew that? Do you realize that there's 6 JVM memory regions? You have to configure each one of them appropriate. It's like, ah. So you know, the Cloud Foundry guys have try to automate that to a degree. It's not perfect. It's never going to be error-free, to your point, sir. It's never going to be error-free, right? But one of our most senior guys, Ben Hale, I mean, he's incredible. This guy's a 20x engineer. He's insane. Let me see if I can find the memory calculator. 1 second. It will basically profile your app and come up with default Java memory settings. And it basically, yeah, it'll just take some pretty educated guesses at what your JVM settings should be, so that if you do want to run boot inside of a container, because what a build pack's purpose in life is to build a Linux container. It's just that the difference between build packs and Docker are that you know what pops out of the build pack process every single time. It's an instruction set to build a container, right? But Docker images that you inherit from other people, you have no freaking clue what's in them. You don't know if the OS is patched. You don't know what the hell is in there, right? Now, if you automatically were to generate a Docker container with intelligent settings, it begins to sound a lot like a build pack. Funny, like so. And we add a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I mean, we're not anti-Docker. We're happy to work with Docker, at least on Cloud Foundry. Boot is fairly Docker friendly. But you know, stuff like this, we can do stuff like this on the build pack side. Can't really. We're not Docker, so we can't affect that. You know, that's up to them. Like, but they don't make it easy, right? So just a little bit of philosophy there, I guess, on containerized Java. But great question. I mean, absolutely a totally valid point. You know, why couldn't we just generate? I wouldn't be surprised if someone maybe has already written a utility that does that. It's lurking out there in open source. You know what I mean? I would bet you $5 actually that exists. We just don't produce it. So that was a really, really long answer to your question. There you go. There you go. Yeah, it's probably not uncommon that people have asked for that. Yeah, it's true. It's true. No, it's a great point. Other comments? Yeah, please bring it. I'm so glad you asked that. I'm so glad you asked that. One of our most distinguished engineers, Dave Sire, who is a freaking genius, wrote this up for us. If you just Google Spring Boot memory performance, you'll get an excellent walkthrough of that. But basically, you know, we make some, like I said, we make some default settings, assumptions, and you know, heap use for our vanilla boot app is about this. Can you read that? Is that? Sorry, is that a little easier to read now? Okay. 25 megabytes. Not too bad. Yeah. I mean, maybe not so much for embedded devices, but yeah. But that's probably a lot for an embedded device for sure. I get that, but for typical server-side Java, that ain't nothing, right? And then throw cloud at it, and it's definitely nothing. Now, believe me, you can add in a ton of dependencies really quickly and make it a lot more than that. I think maybe what you're asking is what does a typical application tend to run at? If you're doing a REST service, 512 mega RAM is not unheard of. What's this half step back from that? 256, not uncommon. It depends what your microservices or your apps are doing. If they're doing a lot, then they take up more memory. I mean, you know that just as well as I do, right? Is there a breaking point for what? I'm sorry? You mean network throughput? Oh, I mean, it's no more than Tomcat allows, right? I mean, it's whatever Tomcat, however you've configured Tomcat, however well or not well you've configured Tomcat, right, is the answer to that question. Now, I think philosophically, there's an answer that goes beyond that, right? There's an answer that we just introduced Spring Framework 5.0 for the first time about a week ago, 1 week after Java 9 shipped. And Spring 5 is fully Java 9 compatible on the module path and on the class path. So although Java 9 modularization stuff that they've done, totally compatible already, 1 week after release. So that is, yeah. And did that answer your? Okay. Totally, that's where I was getting at with the Spring Framework 5 release stuff. Yep, absolutely. So, Tomcat is inherently a synchronous blocking, development metaphor, and so is servlet, right? But with Spring Framework 5, there are options and programming models for you to do non-blocking I/O, and not just like some of the other Java solutions on this take do. You have to be built on a reactive foundation, like all the way from stem to stern. Like some of the Java EE servers, for example, will have reactive style APIs, but they're still executing on top of a servlet engine, which is fundamentally blocking, right? So you're getting like all the pain of trying to do asynchronous programming, which is totally different from imperative programming, and you're not getting all the benefit. So Spring Framework 5 has been built from ground up on Reactor, which is a reactive streams implementation, and is fully reactive all the way through the web framework. We use Netty for the most part, like most everyone does in the asynchronous world. There's a down payment on reactive Spring Security, and there are some reactive drivers for various NoSQL databases that are already out there that we support from a Spring Data repository perspective. Actually, Oracle announced, or I should say re-announced, because they announced it last year and they didn't do shit for a year, I think, was the async JDBC driver that they were working on, right? And then they actually, to their credit, this year on stage, they came up with it, pulled it up, and re-announced it again, and it looked like they'd actually done a fair amount of work on it. We're not sure if that is gonna, we're not sure what the quality level on that is yet. We're hopeful. But that could introduce some interesting possibilities with the Oracle database. So coming soon, obviously, Oracle's working on it. They'll get there eventually, I think. We hope. Do you mean like a mixed reactive type of application? Like, there's some mixed scenarios that we can get into, but I mean, like, that's a little over my head personally, to be honest. But there are some mixed scenarios that you can get into. I'm pretty sure. I thought that you're not really dealing with. I don't think you're dealing with threads too much if you're using the reactive model, the WebFlux framework. Thread management is more the process of the synchronous stack right? There's some relationship with threads, but I wouldn't listen to me on that front. You know, I would check the documentation. Yeah. Sorry, it just came out like last week, so I'm still learning about it, to be honest. Sure. Yeah, totally. Yep. Yep. No, fully agree. We had people asking us this too, and it sucked to have to say, well, use Scala. You know, we didn't want to say that anymore. So, because we have customers that are pushing the boundaries of the microservice stack in terms of like chaining REST API calls together, and like, I mean, when you chain too many of those together, at some point you pass the browser timeout, right? And then it's like your system might as well not be up. So, so there are people who need reactive. Not everyone needs it. Not everyone should use it. But there are those edge cases, and for those people, it is going to be very important. You're absolutely right. Yes. Oh, Reactor is not Java. It doesn't need to be. It basically provides the two reactive data structures that the rest of the Java Spring framework is built on. It's called a mono and a flux. Like a mono is a single asynchronous deferred result, and a flux is a never-ending stream of asynchronous deferred results. So yeah, so that Reactor layer is just it's a separate project. We employ the committers, but it's its own community. You know, it could serve Go or it could serve C#. You know, it's like that's a separate thing. It's not necessarily Spring per se. But like I said, we've engineered it and we take advantage of it fully, and we build the web framework on top of it as a core dependency. Yes. Yeah. As well as you know, all the other stuff. There's going to be like basically the reactive frameworks will eventually permeate the whole Spring ecosystem. I mean, this is just kind of the initial down payment with the web framework, some security, some data repositories. There's tons of other stuff in Spring, right? The whole microservice stack, Spring integration, yada 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 yada, blah 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 blah. Yep. So the beginning of a really interesting journey for us, for sure. Cool.
Is there a master guide of all these freaking annotations?
Yeah.
How do I keep them all straight?
Yeah, totally. It's a lot of reading. I won't lie. Yeah, no, totally. It's you got your work cut out for you. I mean, you know, Spring doesn't make easy things easy like Django, you know, or PHP does, but it makes complex things possible. You know, and a lot of people appreciate it for that. But you know, for some of the simpler use. It totally, yeah. It's a programming model that you can bring with you almost wherever you go. I mean, that's why people invest time in it. You nailed it. I mean, that's the main reason why people invest time in it. So, and you know, there's a lot of jobs out there for Spring developers. Did I mention we're hiring? Just kidding. So yeah. More questions, comments, thoughts?
You guys have already done the OSGI demos to show how to deploy a cut down?
We did OSGI a long time back. We did, totally. We did OSGI a while back. OSGI kind of died. And Java 9 Modularity just GA'd last week.
Right.
So we're going with what the JVM ships. We walked away from OSGI.
Right.
It's not big enough.
Spring and aught and everything, and just ship a straight server JVM?
I believe so. Yeah, you should be able to. Yeah. Yeah. It's fully like compatible on the module path for JDK9, but it's not an OSGI bundle. It's okay. We went not at all. We went down that run. We went down that road like in 2008, 6, something like that, 2006, 2008, and we tried building a whole product line there. You know, it was just like, unfortunately, the community kind of. There's still a few people that are in it, but it's Java non-modularity is probably going to end up winning because it's part of the platform. So. Other comments? Yeah, please.
So, following with this question here, if you overload the server, isn't the whole purpose of Spring Boot to wind up a bunch of new instances, one and all?
Yeah, sure, but I mean, you need something needs to do that. Boot doesn't do that for you auto magically.
That's what I want.
Right, that's a cloud platform. People charge money for those. You know what I mean? Like a lot of money. So that's usually the commoditization line where we're like, yep, guess what? After you cross this line, you know, Totally. That's where at least that's where the value line is in the market today. You know, AWS is the same way. You know, GCP, Google Cloud's the same way. Everybody's cloud's sort of the same way. Those are big cloud, VMware. Those are big, Cloud Foundry. Those are OpenShift. That's just where the line is drawn. There are things out there to help you make your own platform if that's what you want. You can use Puppet. You can use Chef. You can use Ansible. You can use Salt. You're also, I mean, there are some that would say that you're mildly insane if you want to do that because there are commercial options that exist, and there are commercial software services that exist that you can rent. Sure. Okay. Yeah. Those are, I mean, and a lot of people do that. A lot of them make our, to be honest with you, a lot of them make our best customers because owning that code is expensive. But it depends. Like, you know, if you have people with that kind of talent in-house, then that may make a lot of sense. We certainly have run into that in customers before, no question about it. Most of the people we talk to, you know, unless they're like big banks, and even the big banks, you know, are seeing the value of like, we don't want to do that. But yeah, you can debate where the value line is. That's totally debatable. I can appreciate that.